Hello and welcome back. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports and We Buy Guns in Westfield, Indiana, and you are watching Marksman TV. Welcome back to another weekly used gun review. Remember, in these videos we take about 6 used firearms that have come into our store either through the front door or through our website, and we give you guys about a 4 or 5 minute review of each to give you guys an idea of some different things out there on the market. So if that sounds interesting to you, let's go ahead and dive into it now. Alright, remember the format of this video is we start with most common and move through least common as the video progresses, starting us off with our first spot. This one comes to us from a viewer in Florida, so thank you so much for selling this one to us. This is an FNX 45, chambered in 45 ACP, as the name would suggest. This is in the bitone color configuration. It feeds from a detachable 15-round box magazine. They come with 3 magazines as new. It is a double single action pistol, and it operates on the short recoil operating principle. Now, back in 2005, SOCOM would spearhead a new pistol program which was intended to replace the Beretta M9 in military service across different branches of the armed forces. Now, this program was known as the Joint Combat Pistol Program. For this program, they wanted a couple of specific characteristics on the firearm. They wanted it to be chambered in 45 ACP. Remember, this is going to replace the M9, which is 9mm, and it itself replaced the 1911 A1 in about 1982, which itself was 45 ACP. So we're going back to 45. It would have an integrated accessory rail, the ability to change the grip contour either through back straps or different grip modules. It would have a higher capacity magazine. And that was essentially it, other than it needed to be submitted with a suitable holster and magazine pouch and cleaning kit. Now, many different companies would submit their own pistol designs. These would include Beretta, Ruger, Taurus, Para Ordnance, of course FN, Glock, SIG. But at the time, FN did not actually have a pistol in their catalog that really met all of these requirements. So quickly they would get to the drawing board and come up with a new pistol design that they could submit for this handgun trial. Now, they would, in 2006, have essentially an earlier version of this pistol ready known as the FNP. Now, the FNP is like the FNX. There are a couple changes, and we'll talk about those in a minute. It was a very interesting pistol, again, having a lot of the similar features you see here, and it would meet the requirements for the handgun trial and was actually a very good contender for that program. Now, unfortunately, the trial really didn't take off. After only a few months of being implemented, it would be shelved with no real new replacement being selected to stand in for the Beretta M9. And of course, the M9 would go on to serve a military service up until more than a decade later, when it would finally be replaced by the SIG P320 variant through the XM17 modular handgun trial program, which we know just happened 4 or 5 years ago. Now that FN actually had a really nice, interesting product, they were able to come out with the FNP in different calibers such as 9, 40, and 357 SIG, and it did really well in the consumer market. People really liked the handgun design. Now in 2009, they would revise on the design, coming out with this, the FNX, first in 9 and 40. Now they made a couple changes from the FNP. The number one change that they had done is they had redesigned the frame and the locking block so that the barrel could actually sit lower into the frame, giving it a lower bore axis and allowing the shooter's hand to ride a little bit higher on the frame. This just was a lot more comfortable to people, especially people who like to bear in their hand or dig in their hand really deep into the frame and have a very sort of somewhat low profile of these sights over the wrist. Now, it's still kind of tall for what this is, really akin to like a SIG P226, not quite as low as something like a CZ75, but a definite improvement. They also put more aggressive grip stippling here, and then they would go to actually 4 interchangeable back straps as opposed to the reversible 2 back straps that would come with the FMP, and then it would be sold with a total of 3 magazines, and the capacity would be increased to 15 rounds in the magazine for the 45. Now the 45 would actually be released in 2012, so just a few years later after the 9 and the 40. And you get this. They had different slide and frame color configurations, the bitone like this. They had an all black version, and then they had a version with an FDE frame. Now, about a year after the FNX 45 was released, in about 2013, they would come out with the FNX 45 Tactical, which a lot of people really like, which is most notably in the full flat dark earth. They do have a all black version of that as well, but in that model, they added a threaded barrel with tall profile night sights and now they're sold with modular optic plates here in the back, just like most modern handguns are. And they have been, again, really good sellers on the market. For the size, weight, and balance, getting 15 rounds of 45 ACP in the polymer frame handgun, it's really been a winner, and again, a really good contender if anybody's looking for a 45 caliber, full size, full frame firearm. Also very reliable and pretty good recoil impulse for the 45 ACP on such a light frame. One other innovative feature about this that was sort of debuted on the original FNP was a 3-position safety. So as mentioned, this is a double single action. Traditionally, when you have a double single action pistol, your safety options limit you to basically 2 different carry modes when the hammer is in the back and ready position. One is to leave it back but the safety on, like this, where you have a round in the chamber, your hammer back, and the safety engaged. Some people get a little bit antsy about that because if somehow your safety were to be knocked off, you have a very light trigger pull on a live round. Another way to do it is to chamber a round, bringing your hammer back and then decocking it, which again can make people a little bit timid, dropping the hammer on a live round through a decocker, but then that leaves you with the firearm in double action mode with the heavier trigger pull. So for those people who want the hammer back with a safety on without decocking it, the FNP allowed that option by having a 3-position safety. So hammer back, safety on, you can carry it that way. Safety off is middle position, or safety all the way down is decock, but not putting the safety on. So again, a lot of other decock models, the decocker and the safety position are one and the same. So you have to, by putting the gun on safe, you have to decock the pistol. On the FNP, that was not the case. So it gave shooters much more variety in how they carried the firearm, whether on double or single action with the safety on or off. So interesting design. If we look at the FNX 45 on the market today, they're typically hovering around the high 5s, low 6s, as long as they're in really good condition and come with all their factory original stuff. The tactical versions are, of course, much higher end, upwards of around the $1,000 mark, if I'm not mistaken. I didn't look at the FNX 45 tactical, but that's typically historically about where they are. So anyway, very cool pistol. Happy to get that one and share it with you guys, the FNX 45. Okay, up next is a pretty popular carbine that I'm sure many of you recognize. This is the Scorpion Evo 3S1. This in the carbine configuration, chambered in 9mm. It has a side folding stock. CZ makes these in pistol configuration as well, which come with braces or you can SBR them. And this is a faux suppressor out here at the end. Now, the story with this would actually begin in Czechoslovakia all the way back in 1961 with the firearm that is credited as the first generation of the Scorpion line, known as the VZ61. It looks quite a bit different than this. I will roll in a picture. It is really more of the size of a traditional handgun. It does have a deployable wire stock that can fold over the top of the machine gun. The 2 little loops that serve as the shoulder rest kind of, when folded, fold around the barrel. You can pop it up on that end of the stock, swinging it around, and you have a nice sort of short length of pull shoulder stock. So serves as a quickly deployed personal defense submachine gun or machine pistol. Now these would be issued with a leather holster. You would fit it with a 10-round magazine when in the holster, but it would be issued with 2 additional 20-round magazines. And would first serve as sort of a police or sort of special use military submachine gun, but later would be quickly used with vehicle drivers and tank crews because of its small nature and the fact it can be easily stowed away in tight spaces, but also could serve as a decent amount of firepower in the event a tank or vehicle driver needed something to defend themselves with. And it was chambered in .32 automatic, which is a pretty small caliber. Now, if we go back to World War II, submachine guns are being used more at the squad level, being brought into direct combat scenarios, but through the 1960s and the development of the MP5 through HK in Germany, the philosophy of how submachine guns are going to be used is changing to more of a special operations and tactical type role, rather than being issued at the general, squad level, if you will. Now, through the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, there's a lot of different countries around the world that are starting to develop their more modernized submachine gun role firearm, and these are typically chambered in 9mm. Now, in 1993, Czechoslovakia would divide into 2 states, essentially, the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Now, the Czech Republic decided, okay, it wanted to enter the modern era. It's a new formed Republic, and it wants, you know, to modernize on its military equipment. And one of the things it's going to need for special operations purposes is an actual dedicated submachine gun in the 9mm. Now, first, CZ had taken the VZ61 design and sort of reconfigured it into a 9mm, giving it the VZ68 pattern, putting a shoulder stock on it, a vertical grip, a suppressor, an optics mount, things like that, trying to modernize the original Scorpion design. And voila, that was sort of their 1990s take on the submachine gun. It was okay, but it was still designed off of old 1960s technology, a little bit complicated to manufacture. So they thought, you know, let's think of something else that's going to be lighter weight. First of all, it's going to be easier to produce, and it's going to be in a more traditional submachine gun package. Now, at this time in Slovakia, there are two designers, or I should say one primary designer, Jan Luchansky, and a business partner, Frank Gasparek, who had formed a company known as Laugo. Now, Laugo, the first prototype that they had been working on was a modern type of submachine gun, which they would dub the M8A. It was built on a lot of polymer components, but was still in a smaller sort of PDW package. Now, the designers at CZ had looked at what had been going on, and this was around early 2000s, 2001, 2002. They had seen the Slovakian Laugo M8A design, and they had talked with the owners of Laugo and about sort of adopting this type of technology. Now, Czechoslovakia, again, being a newly formed republic, they wanted something that was going to be manufactured at home. This was sort of a requirement for new military armament that would be procured. And actually, if you look at Czechoslovakian firearms as part of their history, going all the way back as early as when, you know, the VZ52 and all the different variations of Czechoslovakian firearms have been produced, even though a lot of them would be closely related to Bloc era firearms, they had always taken their own spin on things and produced things at home. And the same would be here. So instead of licensing with Laugo to come up with a new submachine gun design, they would actually purchase the rights to the design in 2007 and actually bring Jan Luchansky on board to spearhead this project. Now, through different design iterations from 2007 to 2009, they would actually land on what we now know as the third evolution, or the Evo 3. The second, by the way, was that 1990s VZ68 that I had alluded to. They now have the third generation, which is essentially this, debuted in 2009. Now, again, it would serve as a submachine gun type role, and Czechoslovakia would adopt it. It would be sold to police departments and militaries actually all around the world, and is actually relegated today as up there with the MP5 in terms of legacy as a submachine gun, very popular. Now, there were two basic variations. There was the A1, so the Scorpion Evo 3A1, which was the military submachine gun full auto version, and the S1, which is the one we have here in the United States, which is the semi-automatic version, again sold in carbine and pistol form. They have been on the U.S. market for many years, and they are very popular, excellent firearms. Now, on the market today, they do sort of vary in a wide range. I see the pistol configurations without braces or anything like that, selling used in about the $600 to $700 range or so. Carbine configurations with stocks going a little bit higher, $900 to $1,000, somewhere in there. Pistols with braces, of course, trying to figure out what the brace thing is going to do, typically $100 or $200 higher than that. So anyway, very interesting firearm. Happy to get this one in and share it with you, the Scorpion Evo 3 S1 Carbine 9mm. Okay, up next we have a really nice firearm coming to us from a viewer in Michigan, so thank you so much for selling this one to us. This is a Tanfoglio /EAA Witness Stock 2. This one chambered in 9mm, and this is their take on the ultimate competition firearm that's competition ready. If we look at what this essentially is, if we go back to 1975 in Czechoslovakia, they had developed a very popular pistol known as the CZ75. Many of you know about that pistol. It has a huge fan following, and we've talked about that pistol on this channel before. Now, the CZ75, one of the most interesting features about it is it incorporated a slide rail system that was inverted, so the slide would fit inside the frame wrapping around the slide, giving it a very low bore axis, which leads to very controllable muzzle flip and recoil. So CZ75s are excellent pistols to shoot, very controllable and enjoyable, soft recoil. Your one sort of thing that you're giving up, though, is the slide profile is very shallow, which doesn't give you a whole lot to grip onto, which is really the only complaint you're going to get out of that. Now, that has been adopted by military and police forces all around the world, and people here on the commercial market love the pistol, and they've come up with many different variations. Now, any good pistol design is often copied, and that is exactly what's happened here, and other companies like we mentioned IMI in Israel with the Jericho 941 took design inspirations off of that concept as well. Now, Tanfoglio in Italy in 1997 would actually do a direct copy off of the CZ75 pattern. They would release this as the Tanfoglio Combat Standard TA95, originally having a steel frame like the CZ75, and it was really a direct copy. The two look pretty much indistinguishable from one another from 10 feet away if you can't read the markings or anything like that. Now, to get it into the United States, which has the largest consumer market, they co-opted with an importer, European American Armory, or EAA, which would bring the pistol into the country as the Witness. They have the polymer frame and the steel frame versions. You have the Witness Steel or the Witness. The polymer frame versions are actually really affordable, very inexpensive when you find them, $200-300 or so, at least last time I saw one. And they're excellent pistols on the polymer frame. So if you find an EAA Witness polymer frame pistol, I think they call them the P for polymer, that's a really good purchase if you guys find one. What they have effectively done here is they took the CZ75 design. If you look at sort of like the Model 85 Combat that CZ does, or the Shadow 2, that's effectively what this is a copy of. So they take their TA95 steel frame design and get it competition ready. In fact, it's been stated that more of these have actually been used to win competition more so than the competition CZ75 and 85 variants. So I don't know if that's verifiable or not, but that's what a lot of people say on the internet, so it must be true. The features on this are rear and front slide serrations, target sights. This is a double single action but does not have a decocker. It's a safety only. The double and single action pull on this pistol are both really nice. Of course, double action is going to be heavy, but easily stageable, but that's how most double action trigger pulls are. Really nice contoured and checkered wood grips with a really nice ergonomic feel, extended beaver tail on here. I really like the weight and balance. Definitely heavy, but it is a competition firearm, so it's really going to help you with recoil along with the shallower slide profile and lower bore axis. Two 17-round capacity magazines with a nice lockable hard case. So all of that brand new on the market. They're around the $1,200 mark, used $800 or $900. So for what you're getting, they are a good affordable race gun that's ready to go to the competition circuit. So really cool product. I just briefly wanted to share that with you guys. We recently had one in 10mm. We have this one here now in 9. We have another one in 9. So just really cool pistols. Wanted to take the opportunity to share them with you guys. So EAA Witness Stock 2. Okay, up next is a classic military surplus rifle that I'm sure many of you recognize, and it's actually a personal favorite of mine. This is the Swiss K11 carbine straight pull bolt action rifle, chambered in 7.5 by 55mm Swiss. It feeds from a detachable box magazine. Now, the story with this would begin in 1889 with designer Rudolf Schmidt, who would come up with the design of the action, and also Edvard Rubin, who would come up with the ammunition. Schmidt-Rubin, that's where we get the name. Now, the original ammunition used on the original 1889 rifle was the GP90 ammunition, which was 7.5 by 53.5mm, which was a black powder paper patch cartridge. Now, the round itself left a lot to be desired, but it was definitely an improvement over the Vetterli rifle, which it replaced in military service in Switzerland in 1889. Now, this would go on to see a few revisions. The first in 1896, when they would change the locking lug location on the bolt from the middle of the bolt body to the front of the bolt body. And then again in 1911, when they would actually focus on a change of the ammunition, which was later known as the GP11 with the 1911 rifle design, which was the 7.5 by 55mm Swiss. Now, it was a much hotter pressure round, a much flatter shooting, actually an excellent cartridge still used today. But with that, you could not use the ammunition in the previous 1889 and 8996 rifles, so they had to have been used in the 1911 rifle. Now, the 1911 rifle is the same length, more or less, as the 1889 and other similar rifles of the day around the pre-World War I era, such as the Gewehr 88 or the Mosin Nagant. type of rifle configurations. Now with the hotter pressure, they moved to a 4-groove barrel with a reinforced chamber, and they would do things like further simplify the design. There was an intermediate cavalry carbine that would move to this type of magazine, getting away from the complicated 12-round magazine that 1889 and 8996 rifles used with the complicated, expensive to manufacture latching system. So they simplified that. They also went away from the sort of large roller coaster style sights to a simple tangent rear adjustable sight. So that would happen on the 1911 rifle as well. Now around that time in the pre-World War I to World War I era, remember the standard issue rifles are very long and cumbersome, but you need something shorter for cavalry use or maybe artillery crews or people who have jobs other than walking around with a rifle. Something easier to carry. So there have been previous versions of the carbine, but the first real successful was the K11, this one here. You take the Gewehr 11 or the 1911 standard issue rifle and you shorten it into a carabiner or a carbine, thus giving it the designation K11. Now, the design implements are really the same as the Gewehr 1911, the rifle version of the 1911, with the same layout of the bolt. The stock is the same with a rounded comb and the semi-pistol grip here, which was a 1911 model change. But ultimately, the big difference is they would change the length of the stock and they would change the sight slightly, moving them back, giving it a slightly longer sight radius as far as the carbines are concerned, and a full-length handguard up here on the top. Now, the K11 was very popular. Troops who were issued the K11 absolutely loved it, but remember, these rifles did not really see much combat use, as Switzerland was pretty much a neutral country through both world wars. Now, in the interwar period following the success of the K11 and a lot of other countries going with the doctrine of moving into a standard issue carbine-length rifle, because why do you need all that extra weight and material to build these really long, cumbersome rifles? You should just go to a standard carbine length, which most countries were doing in the 20s and 30s. Switzerland would follow suit in the 1930s by moving from the K11 to the K31 as its standard issue, getting rid of all 1911 rifles and K11 carbines, actually giving them a kind of home guard and second line defense units and things like that. And that is kind of where the history on this one would end. Beautiful rifle. Always been a fan of the K11 and the K31. On the market today, these are sitting usually anywhere between about $400 and $600, depending on condition. Not quite as high as the K31s, which tend to have a little bit more of a following. But still, for what they are excellent fun shooters on the range. Beautiful, fully machined receivers. 2-stage target trigger, even though it's a military rifle. So just a gorgeous firearm. Very happy to get this one in, always, and happy to share it with you guys. So that is a Swiss Schmidt-Rubin K11. Okay, up next is a really iconic rifle. This one coming to us from a viewer in New Hampshire. So thank you so much for selling this one to us. This is a Century Arms VZ 2008, but specifically this is patterned after the Czechoslovakian VZ58 rifle. Now, chambered in 7.62x39, it looks a lot like an AK, but it really has nothing in common with the AK-47 family, aside from maybe the aesthetics and the fact that they're chambered in the same round. This is functions off of a short stroke gas piston. The AK functions off of a long stroke gas piston. And this uses a sliding hammer type of firing system as opposed to the traditional hammer found in the AK. Now, in about 1955, 1956, Czechoslovakia is looking at moving into the assault rifle class like a lot of other people, meaning shoulder-fired intermediate cartridge select fire rifle, like the AK or the M16 or things that would come a little bit later. Now, their intermediate cartridge is something that Czechoslovakia had implemented on the VZ52, first chambered in their own cartridge, the 7.62x45. Now, later, the Soviet countries, wanted to standardize on a centralized caliber, which was the 7.62x39. So when they would start coming out with a select fire automatic rifle, they would switch over to the 7.62x39, abandoning their original 7.62x45. In fact, they would go back to the original VZ52 rifles and even retrofit some of those in the 7.62x39 cartridge. Now, Czechoslovakia is one of those countries that always wanted to have its at-home arms production. They always had their own take on their own firearms. A lot of the other Soviet Pact type countries, Combloc countries, would adopt versions of the AKM or the AK-47. Czechoslovakia was a little bit different. They wanted to, again, keep their at-home design. They were a nationalistic country, but also it's really a military benefit to have your own designs and production. in case you end up going to war with a former ally, for example. So they had always wanted to focus on in that regard. Same was with the VZ52. Similar principles to the SKS, so they didn't just adopt the SKS, they created their own rifle. Now, this would actually stay in production from 1958 to 1984. It would cease production in 84, but go on to stay in Czechoslovakian military service until 2010, when it would be replaced by the CZ Bren Model 805. Now, a lot of you guys know about those rifles. Those civilian version, the S1 carbines and pistols, are available on the U.S. consumer market. Now they have the Bren 2s out and everything like that. Really long, distinguished military history, really cool rifles. Now, what this is specifically is the VZ 2008, which Century Arms in 2008 got a bunch of these VZ 58 parts kits and built them on brand new barrels and receivers. When these first hit the market, they were really inexpensive, around the $400 or $500 mark. They typically came with 2 or 3 magazines, bayonet, ammo pouches, and cool things like that. But since these have been steadily climbing up in value, and on the used market, you typically find these now, depending on what they come with, between about $800 and $1,000 or so. It's still a really cool rifle, and they actually work really well. Not much else to say about it. If you do like the concept of the VZ58 and want to go with something a little bit more completely Czech made, there is a company, Checkpoint USA is an importer. You can go on their website and purchase the VZ58 models that are made by Czech Small Arms in the current day Czech Republic and imported into the country. They come in small batches. I know Brownell sells them as well. They're quite a bit more expensive, brand new. They're about around the $1,400-$1,500 range or so, but those are 100% Czech made guns, not parts kit builds like these. But anyway, this is still a really cool rifle. They're very lightweight and handy if you guys have never handled them. The furniture is also very different. It is what is known by collectors as the Beaver Barf furniture, which is actually an epoxy type resin mixed in with wood chips. They also have the side folding crutch type stock found on these as well. So anyway, really cool rifles. Happy to get that one and to share it with you, the VZ58 or Century Arms VZ 2008. Okay, last but not least, I have a beautiful 50-year commemorative set of Ruger Blackhawk single action revolvers. This one here in .44 Magnum, and this one here in .357, and these come to us from a viewer in Nevada, so thank you so much for selling these to us. Now, this would come with this nice presentation case, and each revolver does have its original Ruger red box. Now, the story with the Ruger Blackhawk would actually begin in 1873 with the development of the Colt Single Action Army, or the Peacemaker. Now, at the expiration of the Roland White patent that had been previously enjoyed by Smith & Wesson, it was the patent for the bored-through cylinder which was necessary for the revolver to use a self-contained metallic cartridge. Now, prior to that, Smith & Wesson had gained a lot of popularity off of their large frame No. 3 revolver, later revised by Schofield, which is why you often hear it referred to as the Schofield revolver, where he would move the latching system from the frame to the top of the barrel, making it easier to use on horseback. Now, when Colt would get to work on their own bore-through cylinder revolver, they would come up with more or less this design. The single action Army with the fixed cylinder. You have a side loading gate that would open. You would take the revolver to half cock. Later, the Blackhawk would change that. I'll explain that. Bring the hammer to half cock, and you could rotate the cylinder to load in your cartridges through the back. And when you were done firing, you could eject them with this ejector rod right here on the right-hand side of the barrel. It was a very popular design that would gain a lot of favor with the United States military, who would adopt the Single Action Army, actually both the Schofield and the Single Action Army, but due to logistic purposes on the ammunition, the Colt using the .45 Colt and the Schofield using the .45 Smith & Wesson cartridge, the Smith & Wesson version was a little bit shorter, so the Colt Single Action Army could actually use both cartridges, so the military would standardize on the single action design. It would stay in popular use from 1873 all the way up to 1941 with the beginning of the Second World War. And it also saw a lot of popularity with the civilian population as well. Now, they would be built on 4 3/4 inch, 5.5 and 7.5 inch barrels. And that would stay as the standard production barrel lengths, again, up until the end of the production of the first generation run in 1941. Now, Colt had military contracts, so of course they would not need to produce single-action armies anymore unless you were General Patton. You might disagree with that, so they would cease production then. Now, Colt really didn't have any sort of, they did not really have plans to resume the single-action army line through the 1940s and then through the 1950s, but there were some insinuating circumstances in the market that would get them to change their mind. Through the late 1940s and early 1950s, Western genre entertainment was becoming very popular with books, magazines, comic books, movies, TV shows, and things like that. So Ruger, who was actually a very new company at the time, had noticed that there was an interest in this, especially on a modernized single-action design, because people were taking old first-generation Colt single-action armies and putting modern sights and things like that on them, including Elmer Keith, a popular wildcatter at the time. So Ruger would come up with a single-6 revolver, a 22 rimfire, and this was around 1953, and it saw a tremendous amount of success on the market. Very quickly following that, in 1955, Ruger would come out with a centerfire version of that on the standard scale of the single-action army with modernized features, and they would know this as the Blackhawk revolver. What you would have is the flat top receiver type of configuration, or frame I should say, with rear target sight, target ramped front sight, nicer grips, and you would sort of see changes from the hammer configuration, and also the fact that you would not have to go to a half-cock position to load your rounds into the cylinder like you would on the Colt, and improved a little bit for safety. Now, 1 year later, actually during 1955, Smith & Wesson had been developing the .44 Magnum cartridge. They would come out with a Model 29, which saw a tremendous amount of success, but there wasn't enough availability on the market. Smith & Wesson could not make them fast enough, so Ruger decided to pivot the Blackhawk, which was originally offered in .357 in 1955, and a year later they would come out with the .44 Magnum version. Now, they are still produced today, and they are a staple on the Ruger line, and it was because of the Blackhawks coming out and seeing a ton of success off of Colt's single-action design that Colt would actually come out with a second generation of the single-action army in 1955, 1956, following the success of this. So it's kind of because of Ruger that, you know, Colt would come out, and we now have the second generation and later now the third generation Colt single-action armies. Now, Colt would also come out with a new Frontier model with the target sights and everything following the lead of the Blackhawk line, and you can get those. We actually talked about that on a video or two ago. Now, what this is here is this is a 50-year commemorative set, so 50 years of the .44 Magnum and 50 years of the .357. Again, this coming out in 1955 and .357, so on top of the barrel, it's marked 1955 to 2005, and the .44 Magnum being released in 1956, though thus marked 1956 to 2006. Not much else really to say about it. On the market today, the commemorative sets, there aren't too many examples that have sold on the market, but I've seen a few that have sold at auctions over the past few years, and they're anywhere from about $1,500 to $2,000, depending on the buyer and the auction, the venue, and that sort of thing. So anyway, really interesting set. I know I just talked about these on the recent unboxing video when we just got them in, but for those who don't watch those videos and who watch the weekly used gun review videos, I wanted to make sure that these were featured in this video as well. So I know a little bit of rehashing of information if you did watch that unboxing video, but anyway, really happy to get these in and share them with you. A match commemorative set of the Ruger and Blackhawk revolvers in .44 Magnum and .357 Magnum. Well, that is all the time I have for you today on these. Thank you so much for stopping by and checking out this video. If you enjoyed, please let me know by hitting that like button. Please also consider subscribing to my channel and hit that bell notification button so you are aware when we are posting new content. I'm going to leave you guys off with that. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports, and we buy guns in Westfield, Indiana. You are watching Marksman TV, and I will see you next time.